Welcome to the Lighter Side of the Spectrum, a podcast where we explore how to find joy, connection, and growth while navigating the challenges of parenting kids and teens on the autism spectrum. Remember that inclusion and hope are key to making life better for everyone, and that even in the most challenging moments, there's always a lighter side. Now here's your host, David Kaufer.
Hello and welcome, friends, to another episode of the Lighter Side of the Spectrum. Today, I am beyond excited to introduce someone who's incredibly special, not just to me, but to our entire family. And that's Meghann Parkinson. Meg is Stone's spelling practitioner and just a critical part of his and our communication journey over the last 2.5 years. Meg is the sole member and owner of Non-Speaking Communication, LLC, which is located in Bellingham, Washington, about an hour and change from us. And her dedication to the non-speaking community is just truly unmatched. And her journey is remarkable. She spent more than 7 years practicing spelling to communicate alongside S2C founder Elizabeth Vossler at the Growing Kids Therapy Center back in Virginia. And during her time there, she led groups, workshops, and outreach efforts across the globe, eventually bringing her expertise and passion here to the Pacific Northwest, fortunately for us and many others. Meg has made it her mission to celebrate neurodiversity and teach the world about the power of S2C, always with a joyful and fun approach. And so today we're going to dive into her work, her insights, share some stories, and talk about what makes her a real trailblazer in this space. So, Meg, with all that, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thank you, David. Thanks for having me. I've been really excited about this.
Yeah, likewise. We have so much to talk about, right? Like there's no shortage. I think our challenge will be trying to fit this into the 45 minutes we have slotted. There will always be room for part two, as I tell people. But I thought what we start with is just kind of the journey. Both your journey. I went kind of glossed over it with the introduction, but I thought maybe I could tell the audience again how we connected. The fact that, Stone started spelling in September, and this was after I had read the book Underestimated by JB. And he was the one who kind of steered me. He said, hey, go to San Diego, down to the spelling center, and Don Marie, go get book DM and however many sessions you can do. And that kind of launched us. And, right after I had kind of booked that, I got a text from him saying, you are so lucky that the best practitioner in the country is moving to your neck of the woods, and you've got to get on her radar right away. And I was like, all right, let's do it. And I remember, sending you an email and kind of starting the process. And it's so funny looking back, right? Kind of like remembering knowing what I didn't know at the time, because it's just all so new, and just everything, the whole paradigm changes and everything else. But I remember, the first time driving up there with Stone, meeting you at, your little office, your personal office, and you've grown since then. But what really stood out, it's just the instant connection you were able to form with Stone, even though, again, he was a new speller, just still with the stencils. And I want to talk a little bit. I brought props. You probably have them too, because kind of help people understand kind of what the journey looks like. But ever since then, we've been able to get together both virtually and in person, and have you work with Stone and just do incredible work together. So that's how we connected. But why don't you talk about, because again, I think it's a really, like I said, interesting journey. How did you get into this world of spelling and working with non-speakers?
Yeah, it's always interesting. A lot of people will ask, "Oh, what was your background?" And I have to say, I was working at a hair salon. I was working at a hair salon, and I was the receptionist and shampoo girl, and not very happy in that field, but it was there. And my best friend, who now lives in China, is the son of Elizabeth Vossler, so the founder and owner of Growing Kids Therapy, S2C, the method, and I Ask, the nonprofit that trains
Right.
and certifies practitioners. her son was one of my best friends, and I was living the dream as a young 20-something in a band with my friends.
That's
And
right. You were in a band, right? You said it was like 8 other people, like it's a huge band, traveling band or whatever.
totally, yeah, there were 10 of us.
10 of you. Oh my God.
Yeah,
Earth, Wind, and
yeah.
Fire.
I know, right? And then, in hindsight, now they think about it, it's like 10 musicians who are just trying to get off the ground. That's very challenging.
Well,
But we were asked by Elizabeth to just kind of play a nice little local light fun party show in her backyard, just have some acoustic music going, and we did. And she kind of texted me after that and just said, I was at my old job at the hair salon and I got a text that said, Jimmy says you're not really happy with where you're at. I don't know if you know about what I do, but I'd love to have you come in and observe and, see how it's going and see if this will be a good fit for you. She liked my personality. I was also a theater student in high school. So if ever I feel anxious about anything, I just step into character. So I said, fine, I'll do this. I can step into character. But I went to her office to observe. She said, because she gave me the whole layout, if this isn't anything you're interested in, there is something else here that I know you can help me with that I think you'd just be a lot happier. And I was like, okay, I'm very interested to see. And it was the first session with a teenage boy, and he was kind of just talking about the things that were challenging for him and the things that he wanted people to know. And I was just struck with a feeling that still resonates to this day
yeah.
was, especially after being in a hair salon, I was just struck with the feeling that I've been so privileged my whole life without even knowing it, that if
Mhm.
I wanted to be mad at my parents, I could yell and scream at my parents. And if I needed to, I could get in the car and drive away somewhere. I could rebel. I could make my choices. And it had never occurred to me, of course, I mean, after everything I've learned, that this was going on for people. And it was just within that moment where I was like, well, I can take some of that privilege that I have and use it for good to help them. And even if that, I'm not encouraging anyone to tell off their parents in a session or anything, but
Well, that's kind of part, but I think that's a typical part of developing and growing up. Like you said, I mean, that's just, you take it for granted. I mean, we've all been there, right? And now as parents of teenagers, I've been on the other side of it. I mean, that's natural.
yeah, yeah,
And to kind of have that, like you said, like this artificial barrier placed there, right? Where all of a sudden as we know from a cognitive and mental standpoint, this population, they have the ability to want to do it. They're doing it in their heads, right? But they can't actually do it. And
right.
that's
Yeah.
just,
And to see it with my own eyes when I started working there and I started with students who were new and I was seeing it happening, the progression, the improvements as time went, it's undeniable. You can't unsee what you've seen. And then when you've been in my position, you can't undo what it's also done to me. So I have also realized that I have ADHD, and it was working in
mm,
this kind of population, working with this population and in the community, that I realized, well, first, I realized how similar we all are just as human beings in general. But then I realized too at how my own public education system had failed me and
oh,
potentially
really?
friends. Yeah, I didn't get diagnosed until I was in my 30s, and it was
Oh,
because
no kidding. Wow.
yeah, it was because I'd recognized and I was like, I need to take this seriously, and I'm starting a business. So got to be on
Yeah,
top.
seriously. Yeah, no, it's true, right? I mean, you're a business owner as well as, a practitioner and everything else. And there's a lot that goes into that.
Yes, a lot of that, separating, prioritizing. But it was then I recognized where I was held back because it wasn't recognized. And so I just think the more we listen to these stories that our students and spellers are telling us, we kind of it's so relatable, even though We are all living very different lives and have very different abilities. There's always some underlying emotions that I'm like, yeah, I get that. That would really frustrate me too. Or like, yeah, I have felt that too. I get it, you know? So, yeah.
Yeah. And you know, did you feel like when you first started, were there any kind of like systemic biases that you felt like you had to overcome, or were you able, you know, because one of the mantras, right, that's kind of preached within the community, and rightfully so, we talk about presuming competence. Like you've got to start from that position of presuming competence, that the capabilities are there, like we said, the cognitive ability, and certainly that's something that we saw in Stone's life was lacking, particularly again in his education, his public education, and for so many others. But I think it's hard because again, I think from a society standpoint, it's so ingrained, right? Like again, you hear because we have these terms intellectually, you know, developmentally disabled or delayed,
Low
intellectually,
functioning.
well,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, high, low functioning, what all these different labels. And I just know again for myself, it was a real struggle. As I've talked about, even with Stone, I said I kind of went from when he was very young, really understanding that he was locked in his brain, right? I knew that he was smart and he was locked in there. But it was hard not to be impacted after years and years of these IEPs and hearing all these professionals, whether they're, you know, ABA, speech therapy, teachers, you know, just kind of hammering in this, oh, well, and I'll never forget that there was one teacher who talked about how he was disabled, how he had this, you know, intellectual disability. And I was just stunned because I'm like, I've never viewed him that way. But it's hard not to, because again, when you keep hearing about these, you know, these failures, you know, you want to keep believing, and obviously we did with Stone, but it did impact us. And so there is that transformation I think a lot of people have to go through, right? The paradigm shift of like presuming confident, like, hey, they're there. And I'm just curious, did you have to go through that as well?
Um, you know, personally, I would say I I trusted what I was hearing from,
Hmm.
Elizabeth and the others. And then it was kind of good that I didn't have a background in any of this because I didn't have to shift any paradigms. I didn't have to make any of that. I believed what I was witnessing in front of me, and I didn't have old biases to work against. That, though, is hard going into a field where now I'm interacting with people who have all of those, and I'm just la-di-da, innocent. Yay, this is amazing. How can you not believe this? Um, that was the bigger challenge, was then trying to help people shift their perspective on the whole thing. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I could see it. That's funny because I could totally see that, right? Like I said, your experience is so profoundly different because you've come at it from this totally different perspective from the get-go, right? Like you said, so that's kind of like in a way the perfect introduction is that you kind of have this baseline of, hey, you know, presume confidence, this is what you're going to experience, and then you get to see it yourself. You're like, oh, okay, of course. And then like, wow, yeah, they're right. And so off you go. Whereas again, you have this kind of this other side of the community, I don't even know what you call it, but just who have come in with different assumptions. And they're like, no, how can that be? And you're like, because it is.
I just taught it.
Right.
That's kind of how it's laid out. And um, yeah, so that I would say was the bigger challenge, was then dealing with that and being in those settings where and it was uncomfortable for a while. We've come such a long way though in those past 10 years, where I'm interacting more and more with people who are open-minded, and because they have read the things, they've seen the things, they've heard about the things, and so they're more intrigued, which is really wonderful. It makes my job a lot easier. Rather than
Yeah,
like to spend my time with your child, I wouldn't like to spend my time trying to, convince anybody, but that sometimes is the case, and that's okay because I can do that too.
yeah. Well, like you said, it's a lot more pleasant to deal with someone who's intrigued by it, open to it, rather than someone who's coming in arms crossed, right? Skeptical, you know, convinced it's some kind of magic trick. I don't even know, right? Like
Right. Right.
whatever people
And
think.
I do love, I will say, I do love when there is some skepticism, because then it kind of is fun because I get to really get into the science and the philosophy and everything that's involved with S2C. Um, and I'm okay with questions, I think people should
Right.
ask questions. And if you see something, you should ask me about it. And I should tell you about it, full transparency is kind of my deal in my office. I'm going to talk about everything. Nobody's going to be left in the dark. You're going to know.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know from our experience that, again, we appreciate that. I'd like to say that it was as simple as the light bulb went off, which in a lot of ways it did for me from day one with Stone, from that first day with DM. And I've told the story here on the podcast, the Benjamin Franklin story and all that went into it. Like I said, it's a forever etched. But it is such a switch that there, you kind of get these moments where you kind of think like this is too good to be true. And Renee, my wife Renee from the get-go was skeptical, particularly because again we had Stone was going through speech therapy for a number of years, and she was someone who was a trusted member of our what we thought was Team Stone, right? And someone who's you're close to. So of course you're going to listen to them, and when you hear this, what I call nonsense, of course, from ASHA, the Speech Therapist Association, which is really, trying to belittle and just, totally degrade this methodology. That was a hurdle that we had to overcome. That you and I know, kind of worked together, and there was something in her case. She had to see it to believe it herself, and she had her. There's one moment that we talk about where she had her moment where she got to see spelling when we were on spring break. And Stone was sitting down. We were walking around doing the sightseeing, and he just sat down. And I'm like, what's going on, buddy? I had the backpack. I pulled out the letterboard, and he spelled out, "My feet hurt." And that was the first time, really, because it was totally spontaneous, right? Like it was everything was right there to show how
Yep.
authentic it was. And so I put on his shoes, and because we were the same size, and I'm like, oh my God, these are crap. Like, I mean, I don't like it. They were awful. Like they were just so bad. I felt horrible, right? The parent, you're going, oh my God, I can't believe we had our kid walking around in these. But that's one of those small moments that's so huge, right? Like that's such a little thing that I think just tells such a big story of like he couldn't even tell us his feet hurt before.
Right.
And I think about how impactful that is.
Right. Right. Totally. It's so many it's things like that. And then when we realize that how important a communication partner is, and how someone learns the steps to be able to get to that point where you can say, I know something feels a little off here. And my first instinct, grab a letterboard, and to find that out. And so, yeah, that's huge. And kind of when going back to what you said about ASHA and everything, that just again and reinforces the importance of the need for a communication partner, a CRP, and to be, constantly working through those steps and on those skills to get to that point.
Yeah, so why don't we talk about that a little bit? Again, that's something we could spend a long time talking about the whole process of spelling, but I think one of the misperceptions people have when they see a speller, and particularly with a board, is that it's just really simple, right? Like, I brought my props. So if you're listening, I have a letter. This is kind of one of the early versions. This is the stencil version of the letterboard, and as you imagine, you put it in front of them, and then the speller usually uses the pencil to poke through it, right? And that's so. Why don't you talk briefly, kind of about the progression and kind of the how it works
Yeah.
for a layperson?
Yeah. So, and I've got, they're way over there, but so that big 26 stencil that you had, to take it even further in the beginning, we have broken that one board down into 3 separate ones.
Right.
So letters A through I is on one, letters J through R on another, and S to Z are on the last one. The reason why we do this is because, like learning any new skill, we have to start slow. We have to start somewhere, and we have to start with the first step. If you take piano lessons or an instrument of any kind, you're
Yep.
not going to go in learning songs. You're going to go in learning notes and then chords and then different things. So there's so many other things before you get to playing the song. And it's the same with S2C,
That's a
spelling.
great analogy.
Yeah. And it's same with, think of like training wheels on a bike. These simpler versions, even that bigger 26 stencil is technically simpler than a keyboard. But we have this hierarchy of skills and boards that you go through to basically get you to that point of, quote unquote, playing songs and writing poetry and stories, or just communicating openly needs, wants, desires. We do that because the smaller they're three boards with those separate letters on it. It's easier visually, and it's also less options to make a mistake, make a mispoke if you have them separated. And that's the stage that we call the acquisition stage. If you're just learning something new, we're going to use those boards to help you not spell answers to questions. We're going to use those boards to help you move your arm forward and backwards to poke letters. We're working on the motor skill. That's
And
the
yeah, I just want to interject there and say again, for listeners who are not familiar with this, again, this is kind of really the paradigm shift, is that when you're dealing with so many of these, non-speakers, really, when you're talking about the disability, it's a motor disability. It's not cognitive. And I think that's been the major disconnect that we've had for so many years as a society. So when, Meg, you're talking about, like I said, it's like learning to play a piano. I mean, it's literally training your motor. And anyone who's done anything like try to learn, you know, learn how to play an instrument or play golf or, anything that requires eye hand coordination, motor skills, all that, understands that practice makes perfect.
right. And to go back to that, this reminded me of something I wanted to bring up too, is that standard testing, especially for non-speaking autistics, and we'll think of anybody with a disability, standard tests involve motor skills, the use of motor skills, and
Yeah.
it involves the finest of motor skills. That's speech. Even just manipulating your fingers like this is fine motor. Also, testing happens to be in a stressful environment for autistics. There's a
Yep.
lot of pressure. They understand what this test means, and they understand what their results are going to be, because it's a kind of test that's just setting everyone up for failure, because they're all based on motor. And again, that's fine motor. And there isn't any way so far to test if something is a cognitive disability or if it's a motor disability. I mean, there are, but we need someone to say, I'm still here, I'm thinking and comprehending. But if you have a motor disability, that's really challenging. So we use the term all the time, apraxia. So without the
Right.
ability to execute those smooth chains of movement. And that's why, to go back to the letter boards, we start with those three because we're working with apraxic bodies who oftentimes haven't been given an opportunity for this kind of challenge. So we start really slow and we start at the very base level, super easy, basic motor skills of looking at a letter and poking it and pulling your arm back, and continuing this until you're now accurately poking the letters. And then we can keep moving from there. A big component to all of this too is the lessons. We presume competence because, again, because all tests measure motor skills, and there isn't a whole lot to measure cognitive skills, we operate on the least dangerous assumption.
Yeah.
He can and he wants to learn, and we're going to give that to everybody. Everybody's sorry, I thought I had that muted. We
Oh,
give
it's fine.
everybody, yeah, everybody has the opportunity to learn and should have the opportunity. So we start with educational lessons that are age appropriate, and we teach all the information that we are having the students spell. So none of it's coming out of nowhere where someone's like, how did he know this? We'll say, I read it to him, I taught it, I spelled it aloud, and I made a point to spell it aloud and then ask him this. So we don't leave any room, open for what is this? What's going on? Misunderstanding. If I just taught it and then we did it. It's after that when the skills start to improve. The longer you've been working on it, I'm prompting, I use gesture prompts because, again, like anyone learning a new skill, we need prompts.
Right.
Someone put it best to me and said, like, what is YouTube? It's a prompt site. It's a prompting website. You can do anything and it shows you how
That's
to.
great. That's true. That's true.
Right? You know, you want to fix your own bicycle wheel or whatever, you can go onto YouTube and they're going to tell you step by step how to do it. That's a prompt. So we start off prompting, and right when we practice those skills more and more and more, they become permanent. We like to say practice makes permanent because you're myelinating the pathways in the brain and making that a strong skill, a strong pathway, neural pathway, where the messages can get there from brain to body and back easily and smoothly. So we're prompting a lot. And then after that, it's not necessarily switching to a board, but now I'm going to start fading my prompts back. So I'm going to use those same 3 boards, but I'm not going to use any gestures, or I'm not going to use a whole lot of, oh, over, next door, keep moving. I'm just going to slowly start fading out the different kinds of prompts I have. And based on my teaching, side note to Asha, when we think of these things that are coming out, we're kind of paying attention to some of the, what did Stone say? Stone said a bad apple. I thought that it might have been him. There's bad apples in every bunch. And it's like the negative comments on social media. Why do those hurt
Right.
my feelings more than these wonderful good ones? So we focus on pulling back those prompts so I'm not gesturing, and we observe the skills. My teaching should have given my student the skills to be able to poke those letters accurately without any of my help. And if I notice we still need it, then that's just still a skill we need to work on. But I'm continuously working to fade those prompts out until I'm basically just an arm holding a letterboard.
An arm holding a letterboard. And again, I just want to reiterate just your point about the prompting, because that's supposedly used as one of the arguments against it. I know in our case, when we first tried to have letterboards introduced to Stones in his public school, right, or have a communication partner, they're like, oh, well, you're prompting him, and that's giving, that's not reliable. And without saying that, again, every form of therapy has prompting. I mean, speech therapy, I have videos of his speech therapist literally manipulating his mouth, because they're trying for good purpose. I mean, it's part of the therapy. I'm not saying that that's wrong,
Right.
but that's part of almost everything that we try to do when we teach young children, typical young children, how to read, right? We're usually prompting them, we're helping them. If it's a big word, it's, you help coach them through it. No one thinks anything of that either. But for some reason, if you're just helping them from a motor standpoint, get to one letter, oh my God, there's no way that's them. That somehow it's, the partner influence. And just, as you can tell, it makes me very angry.
No, I'm with you. I often think about these expectations put on non-speakers and really anybody in general that would never be put on another person.
Never.
A neurotypical person would never have to go through that. And so why is this so much harder? Why aren't we being more flexible and seeing, hey, okay, that test doesn't work, but that shouldn't be our our finite line of what intelligence is. How can we, I mean, honestly, they're figuring out ways to test animal intelligence. So it's like,
Right.
you did that without speech. You've done that without any type of motor that we're aware of because they're animals. So
It just shows, again, I think, from like, it's a societal bias that has to be overcome. And it's happening through spellers like Stone and the many others, right? As the population grows, like you said, you can't unsee it. Just in the recognition of time, I want to kind of speed through kind of the rest of progression because we have a few other things to get through. So just again, for the listeners and those watching, so it does start with the poking of the letterboards and gradually goes through. And I did bring my props. So, kind of to eventually to, like we said, this 26 letter, and then to a laminate board, right? And
Yep.
in this case, it's hard to see, but this was the first laminate board that Stone started working on with Meg. And to help, because there's also, you put the little sticky,
Little Velcro dots on it.
well,
Yeah.
right? And the tactile, because the tactile feedback is also an important component for so many, right?
Right.
To help coach. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, I just got the, so they're like Velcro stickies that you can get on Amazon. They have the scratchy side and the soft side. You put the scratchy
Right.
on the letters, completely clear, but you can hear that there is a base there, so it's kind of like a button. And if you don't have these, and it's just a clear board, and that's fine too. But the dots are just, if you need a place to land, we have that for you.
Yeah. And then again, many spellers such as Stone again progress then eventually to the keyboard, right? This is what he uses now, and an iPad. And so it's just so amazing, right? To see the progress that's made. I was wondering if was there a transformative, again, you were kind of introduced to the process in a different way, but even in those early days, was there a transformative moment for you when you really thought like, wow, this is incredible. My life's changed, their lives changed.
Yeah, it was actually the first open-ended thing response I had gotten from the student I had started working with, we were there. We were, I think back now of the patience that this young man had because he was a wonderful teacher for me. Because he watched me go through a lot of bumps and roadblocks, and I messed things up and I mistaught things, and I would always make up for it. But I had asked him, we were reading a lesson about famous people, and there were some quotes, and it was a quote from Mark Twain, and it was something like, you can't throw bad habits out the window, you have to take them down the stairs and out the door one step at a time, something along those lines. And so the question was for him, like, what does that mean? And his answer was as simple as, take your time. That was it. That was his
Yeah.
response. Get it? And afterwards, we both just were like, we stared at each other for a second, and then we started like dancing, like, oh. So it was the first time that someone was able to just, and when I say with me, or I got an open communication thing, it's just mostly the first time as a practitioner, also as a communication partner for someone, where they were able to cross those barriers, whatever they were, of picking up with a new person and learning me. um, he got through it, and we were able to do that together. So it was huge, because then I tell everybody, the practitioners that I train, practitioners in training that I'm mentoring,
Hmm.
once you get that first one, the floodgates kind of open, but you got to be riding the wave to stay, with
Yeah.
you got to keep going with that flow. But once you do, that's the biggest hurdle to get through. And when you do, it just gets easier.
And isn't it amazing? I mean, it should be amazing, but I should say, isn't it cool how so many of these non-speakers, they all have, their own voices, right? Obviously, because they're all individual people. They all have their own styles. But the one consistency is just how incredibly efficient and powerful they are with their communication. I think, and I remember asking you about that early on, and I thought you had a really good answer. Do you remember that when we talked
I
about
do.
that?
Yeah. Because a lot of people are surprised when they see this incredible vocabulary coming out on the letterboards. And I've asked and I've been told, and you can understand too, but if you are sort of, I don't know if locked in your brain is right, but if you are focusing and witnessing the world happening around you, and you're taking in all this information, you're also hearing people talk around you and make big mistakes when they're talking to each other, big communication mistakes. You're learning from that. And
Mm.
someone basically put it, I have all the time in the world, or I've had all the time in the world to think about these things and to know exactly what I want to say, and to know exactly what words will get that meaning across. And it's so true, because once it finally does come out, it's so clear and concise, and the word choice is so particular. And it's particular to every individual, but you know what you want to say to really get the meaning across, and they always do. And that's a big lesson I've learned from my students is like, listen and think before you speak. Because again, going back to me being ADHD, my parents were always like, think before you speak, Meg. Oh my gosh, what are you saying? Pretty good.
This
So
is
now I'm
this
like,
my
yeah, yeah,
is
I
this
get
really my
it.
daughter?
Yeah, right. I'm like, oh, I get it. That's true. But our words have meaning, and it's really helped me to understand like there's no need to beat around the bush. Their honesty really is the best policy.
Yeah.
Um, and to listen when it's coming out like this on a letterboard, take into consideration how much work was put into that and trust it. If it's reliable
I
and it looks good and clean, trust it.
I love that because you brought up a good point. That's true. Even I'm a professional communicator. I'm, trained. I've journalism degree. I've worked in communications my whole life, but I've learned so much about communication from Stone, right? My non-speaking son. That's just it's amazing, right? Like you said, the power of words, being careful what you say, things that you would think would be intuitive, but they aren't. They're things I think that so many of us either take for granted or forget about, or they just kind of get lost. I think there's so much in communication that just gets fuzzy or lost. That's again, the clarity is right there when you're dealing with
Right.
non-speakers. Um, I want to do again because we're getting closer to time, which I hate.
No.
I want to go forever. So I want to do our fact or fiction.
Get QuickTime ready, and here we go. This is Autism Fact or Fiction. We're breaking down what's real, what's rumor, and what might surprise you. Let's go.
Okay, fact or fiction. What do you got for us, Meg?
All right, I got a good one now. Fact or fiction. So, non-speaking is not the same as non-thinking. And the reason why, so that's fact. And I
That is
will,
fact,
yes,
absolutely,
that is
100%.
fact. Non-speaking is not the same as non-thinking. And the reason why we use non-speaking instead of non-verbal, so we think about the Latin word non-verbal translates to without words. Words are language. Language is a cognitive function. Speech is a motor function. And that's where we're seeing the challenge.
Love that. That's awesome. We're gonna do a quick message, and then we're gonna come back, and then we have a couple questions I know that Stone wanted to ask you personally. We may even get a guest appearance from him during this break, so we'll be right back. I hope you're enjoying the lighter side of the spectrum. So far, we're commercial free, but if you're finding value here, one way to support the show is by considering me for a speaking engagement. I speak on unlocking potential, whether it's for individuals like my son or for entire organizations. I also offer fractional CMO services for businesses needing strategic marketing support without the full-time commitment, drawing on over 35 years of experience in marketing. My agency has helped companies and healthcare practices increase their value, grow, and even prepare for acquisition. To learn more about my speaking topics, visit davidkaufer.com. Or if you're interested in our marketing or fractional CMO services, check out kaufermarketing.com. If you're enjoying this episode, please leave a review. Your feedback means a lot, and it helps me make this podcast even more useful. Lastly, don't forget to share it with anyone who would appreciate the insights and stories we're sharing here. Thanks again for listening. Okay, and we're back. I think Stone's going to participate off camera, as he often does. He's part of the podcast. He's always listening and providing me with feedback. But he's not on camera. But like I said, he did write out a couple of questions for you, Meg. And so I'll start with the first one that I know you will love. He wants to know, how did you know that he had the ability to write poems?
Oh, I would say I never know if someone has the ability to write poems, but it is something that I always want to offer. It's an opportunity I want to offer all of my students when they get to that level of fluency. in communication. And once they get to that point, if someone's like, no, thanks, I'm not into it. Okay, we won't have to do poetry, but Stone took the challenge and ran with it.
Yeah, that was one of those moments again that I'll just never forget, because I remember the lesson you talked about poems, you talked about different types of poetry, and you turned to him and says, Stone, do you want to write a poem? He said yes, and I was like, he's going to write a poem, really? Because again, this is so something he's never done, and he wrote, and you gave him the prompts, you gave him the ode. It was an ode.
Right.
And he wrote an ode to my silent self, and it was just so powerful. I mean, it was just the first of many things he's written that brought tears to my eyes.
That was beautiful.
Yeah. So along those lines, I'm laughing because he's running around the house. He's laughing. He's yelling. He's happy. He wants to know. He said, "Yes, I want to know if Meg, have you really gotten goosebumps from anything Stone has written?"
Yeah, that was the short story. So I had a list of 365 creative writing prompts. Super fun
Right.
for anyone who's open and just wants to write. He did. And one of them was I think it was like dancing. Who's out there dancing and why are they tapping those toes? Something like that. And Stone wrote a beautiful short story that when I think about it, even still to this day, it gives me goosebumps. And because that was one that was so far removed from anything personal. It was a short story that you could see published in like the New Yorker magazine or something. It was
Yeah.
cool.
It just came from the depths of his brain, like this creative brain. And yeah, again, obviously I could gush on and on, but okay. I got a couple more, or one more actually. Okay. So, do you like the pressure that comes from your job? This is from Stone. He wants to know if you like the pressure that comes from your job.
Oh, Stone, what a killer question. Um, I think it really depends. There's different kinds of pressures that come with the job. Sometimes it's, from the business side of things, and no, of course, I don't really like that one.
Right. No, yeah, no.
But if it comes to any skeptical people who are around, I don't mind that so much. Like I said, so I like questions. I like being able to answer questions. And I've also learned to, if it's not happening for someone and they're really not into it, it's their choice. I can't fight anyone to continue on with this journey with me. If I've done all I can to express to you what I know to be true and it still isn't working, that's your choice. And I completely understand and accept that. No judgment. Um, and then, sometimes it's pressures of just, I wouldn't say I feel any pressure of keeping up with my clients because have been doing it for a long time.
Yeah.
I like when someone offers something new and they're like, I want to do this. And I'm like, oh, I've never thought about that before.
Right.
Let me see what I can do. So yeah, I would say there's good sides and bad sides to the pressure.
Yeah, when I think about the pressure, it's funny. The business side, that's a great point. But when I think about the core, the core essence of your job, which is really helping unlock these brains, right? And helping them fulfill their communication independence, hopefully, of it. Just, it's an awesome responsibility, right? I mean, and honor in a lot of ways. And I say this again, not as a professional, but just as Stone's communication partner. And I could say you take that so seriously, but you still do it, like I said in the introduction, in such a light and fun way. I mean, I just think that's just a real gift that you have to be able to do that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate. And I always figure that like, what do I need when I'm in kind of a weird environment, especially for those initial sessions, first sessions with people. It really helps me when someone makes a joke to break the ice, to break the tension.
Right.
So just being easygoing is because again, no matter what, even if you know this is a good environment, and even if you know what is involved in S2C, you still might be feeling anxious and excited about what's going on. So it's just nice to have someone be like, you're safe here. We're level-headed, we're cool and regulated. But
The
yeah,
safe safety's key because we're dealing with a population that doesn't always feel safe. They are dealing with some very real trauma.
Right. Oh, and
Because of,
that stuff I could get into a whole bunch too, especially just with the brain science and everything. Yeah.
well, we're definitely going to have to do this again. I mean, multiple segments. I mean, because there is so much to talk about. But before I go, I think I'd also ask, do you have a tip of the week? And if so, we're going to go ahead and we've got our special cue for that. We're prepared for all of this.
Hey parents, gather around, it's time to speak. We're here with your tip of the week. Strategies and wisdom just for you. Autism parents, we know what you go through.
All right. Now Meg has our tip of the week. What do you got, Meg?
My tip of the week is do not underestimate fun and games when you're in your spelling journey. Because fun and games, I even wrote this down. I wanted to keep track of it. It's purposeful motor. Purposeful motor at the end of the day is purposeful motor. It's also going to stick better and really be more desirable and fun and something your student wants to continue if it's fun and exciting. So games, things like that are fun and they bring the whole family together, it can only enhance your practice, and it can only enhance your practice of purposeful motor for the letter boards. So you might need to adapt and relearn a game and figure out how to teach each motor step for it. But I promise, if you incorporate that and just put a little effort into family game night, but adapted for your speller,
Right.
it's amazing. So don't underestimate fun and games and with your purposeful motor.
Oh, that's an awesome tip. And I'll just have to add my own spin to it, like I said, because I've tried to do that. Because like you said, you want to keep it fun. One of the things that really took off for Stone and I is we used to play Name That Tune. And again, that was his way to kind of blow me away, to show that he knew music. But also it was a great way to practice, right? Like on him spelling. So I would just have this huge playlist and we would just go through.
Yeah, I love
But
that.
yeah, it was great. And we still, periodically break it out. But I know we're up against the time, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up today's episode of The Lighter Side of the Spectrum. Thank you, Meg, for sharing your wisdom, passion, I should say, and insight with us. I always learn things from you in our sessions and certainly today. Before we go, I do want to take a moment to thank all the people who've provided me with some great feedback, the reviews. The words and support just mean the world to me. I mean, the reason I started this podcast is I really taken that philosophy. If we just help one person, one family at a time, either discover their voice and have an opportunity to communicate, or discover new resources that they didn't have before, that makes it worthwhile. So, we have a lot of other great, exciting guests coming up. If you have any thoughts, any ideas for other guests, drop me a note. My website's davidkaufer.com. You can send an email to me that way or find me on social media. So with that, thank you again, Meg. A really great session today and a great episode, and we'll have you back soon.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
For all of you listening, if you enjoy this episode, we'd love your feedback, as we mentioned before. Please leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. It really does help us. It helps people find us, which is important. We want to get the word out. We want to have a supportive community. And if you have any other feedback, thoughts, guest ideas, feel free to drop me a note at david.kaufer@hey.com. Like I said, let's make sure that we bring you content that resonates with our group. So until then, thanks for listening and take care.